Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. I started noticing it while pacing. Something about the spacing between the walls felt inconsistent. I'd walk 10 steps one way, then 12 back. I marked it with tape. The lines don't match anymore. When I focus, everything appears normal. But when I turn my back, the air feels wider, thinner, like I've been given more space than I need. I placed a box in the corner once. Hours later, it was farther away, just by a few inches. Now I sleep in the middle of the room, afraid of what might grow around me if I dare to blink too long. The carpet beneath my feet holds the memory of every step I've taken. The fibers seem to press back against my soles differently now, as if they're compensating for distances that shouldn't exist. I run my fingers along the baseboards, feeling for gaps that weren't there before. The wood grain flows uninterrupted, yet something fundamental has shifted in the geometry of this space. I decided to document everything. My notebook sits open on the desk, pages filled with measurements and sketches. The lamp casts the same circle of light it always has, but the shadows beyond its reach stretch farther than they should. I draw the outline of my furniture from memory, then compare it to what I see. The proportions are wrong. The chair sits too far from the window. The bookshelf has gained distance from the door. The air conditioning unit hums its familiar tune, but the sound takes longer to reach me from across the room. I speak aloud, testing the acoustics. My voice returns as a faint echo that never existed before. The walls are absorbing my words and releasing them back changed, softer, more distant. I press my ear against the surface, listening for movement within the structure itself. There's nothing but the subtle vibration of a building settling into new dimensions. My phone camera captures everything normally. The photographs show standard proportions, familiar angles. But when I compare them to the room I'm standing in, they feel like images of a different place entirely. I take pictures while looking directly at the viewfinder, then glance away while the shutter clicks. The results are identical, yet I know something is happening between the frames. I've started leaving objects as markers. A coffee mug on the windowsill, a book spine up on the floor, a pen balanced on the edge of the desk. I memorize their positions, then turn away for what feels like moments. When I look back, they've shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to confirm that space itself is fluid here. sits 3 inches closer to the glass. The book has rotated slightly clockwise. The pen has rolled toward the center of the desk. The smell of old paper has grown stronger, though I own no old books. It's the scent of pages yellowing in forgotten libraries, of documents sealed in boxes for decades. I follow the odor to its source, but it seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. When I breathe deeply, focusing on the fragrance, it fades. When I ignore it, it returns with intensity that makes my eyes water. My reflection in the bathroom mirror appears normal until I step back. Then I notice the frame captures more of the room behind me than it should. The medicine cabinet door, usually just visible in the corner, now sits centered in the reflection. The towel rack has moved farther from the wall. I reach behind me to touch familiar surfaces, but my fingers find only air where solid objects should be. I've begun sleeping differently, positioning myself equidistant from all 4 walls. The mattress feels smaller against the expanding floor. My blanket, which once covered me completely, now barely reaches my feet. I pull it tighter, but the fabric hasn't changed. The distance between my head and toes has somehow increased. I curl into a ball, trying to occupy less space, but the room continues to grow around me. The electrical outlets have shifted along the walls. The one I use for charging my phone now sits several inches lower than before. I have to stretch the cord to reach it. The switch for the overhead light requires me to reach slightly higher. These changes are subtle but persistent, like the room is slowly calibrating itself to different proportions. I started recording myself speaking while facing away from the camera. My voice sounds normal in the playback, but the visual shows something unsettling. The background shifts almost imperceptibly while I'm not looking directly at it. The wall behind me seems to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with something I can't identify. The effect is so minimal that I have to watch each recording multiple times to confirm what I'm seeing. The heating system cycles on with a click that now echoes. The warm air takes longer to reach me, traveling through a space that has quietly doubled in volume. I hold my hand near the vent, feeling the temperature differential. The air grows cold before it reaches me, as if it's traveling through a much larger room than the one I remember. My footsteps have developed a hollow quality, like I'm walking through a cathedral instead of a small apartment. The sound bounces off walls that seem farther away than they appear. I stamp my feet deliberately, listening to the response. The noise returns to me delayed, filtered through distances that shouldn't exist within these boundaries. I've tried to measure the expansion directly. Using a tape measure, I record the distance from wall to wall. The numbers are consistent, logical. But when I walk those same distances, my body tells a different story. The space feels vast, open, like I'm moving through a warehouse rather than a confined room. The disconnect between measurement and perception has become absolute. The window still frames the same view, but the glass seems smaller now, like I'm looking through a porthole instead of a full pane. The world outside appears compressed, condensed into a smaller frame, while everything inside has gained dimension. I press my face against the glass, trying to escape the sensation of expanding space. But the cool surface feels farther from the opposite wall than it should. I no longer trust my peripheral vision. When I focus straight ahead, everything appears normal. But in the edges of my sight, I catch glimpses of additional space that shouldn't be there. Shadow where there should be wall. Distance where there should be proximity. I've trained myself to move only while looking directly at my destination, but this makes navigation exhausting. The room has begun to feel like an ocean. I float in the center, afraid to swim toward any shore. The walls are islands visible on the horizon, too far to reach safely. My bed is a small boat, and I anchor myself to it each night, hoping to wake up in the same coordinates. But even sleep offers no escape from the sensation of drifting through ever-expanding space. My notebook has filled with observations that read like the logs of an explorer, mapping unknown territory. Each entry documents another inch gained, another boundary pushed outward. The words themselves seem to spread across the pages differently now, as if the paper too has learned to accommodate more than it should hold. I wonder if I've become smaller, or if the room has truly grown. The effect is the same either way. I exist in a space that changes when I'm not watching, that adapts to my absence by becoming more than it was. I am the fixed point around which everything expands, the center of a universe that grows larger each time I blink. The box I placed in the corner has now traveled halfway across the room. I haven't touched it. I haven't seen it move. But each day it sits a little farther from where I left it, pushed along by the slow tide of expanding space. Soon it will reach the opposite wall. And then what? room grow to accommodate it? Or will I finally understand the mechanism behind this gradual transformation? I sleep in the center still, but the center keeps shifting. The point, equidistant from all walls, moves as the walls themselves drift outward. I wake each morning slightly displaced, having been carried along by the current of expanding geometry. My pillow holds the shape of my head, but the impression seems smaller now, as if I'm shrinking to match the growing space around me. The room expands when I look away. This much I know for certain. What I don't know is whether it contracts when I'm watching, or if the expansion is permanent, cumulative, irreversible. I suspect the latter. I suspect that each moment of inattention adds to the total, that the space I inhabit is being stretched thin like taffy, pulled toward some breaking point I can't yet imagine. The tape marks I made are still there, but they measure distances that no longer exist. The lines are artifacts of a smaller room, a tighter space, a world where walls stayed where they were placed. I leave them as reminders of what once was, evidence of the room's former boundaries. They serve as proof that this expansion is real, that I haven't simply imagined the sensation of growing space. I am learning to navigate by feel rather than sight. My hands have memorized the texture of walls that seem to retreat from my touch. My feet know the patterns of a floor that extends farther each day. I move through this expanding space like a blind person, trusting in senses that haven't yet learned to lie about distance and dimension. The room continues to grow. I continue to document its expansion. And somewhere in the space between what I see and what I feel, between what I measure and what I experience, the truth of this transformation hides. It watches me as I watch it, patient and persistent, waiting for the moment when I finally understand that the room isn't expanding at all. I am. Story 2. It began as a trick of light, the curve of metal distorting everything. But then I realized the warped reflection wasn't following my movements. It stared just past me, always toward the left. Even when I turned, it didn't adjust. I leaned in close once, whispering to test it. My mouth moved. The reflections did not. It kept staring, focused, as if watching something standing right behind me. I shut the water off. The metal cooled, but the shape lingered for minutes, long after it should have faded. And it was no longer facing left. It was facing me. The bathroom had always been the quietest room in my apartment. Cold tiles beneath bare feet gentle hum of fluorescent bulbs overhead, and that familiar scent of mint soap mixing with something metallic. The chrome faucet gleamed under the harsh lighting, its surface polished to an almost mirror finish. I'd brushed my teeth there countless times, watching my reflection stretch and compress in the curved metal. Normal, predictable. Until that morning when everything changed. I noticed it first while reaching for my toothbrush. The reflection in the faucet showed my hand extending, but the angle was wrong. Subtle, but wrong. My reflection appeared to be looking somewhere else, toward the empty corner where the shower curtain hung perfectly still. I paused, studying the distorted image. When I moved my head left, the reflection moved right. When I stepped closer, it stepped back. The opposite of what it should do. That evening, I returned with my phone, recording everything. The camera captured the gleaming faucet, my movements, the way light danced across the chrome surface. But when I played the video back, the reflection moved correctly, perfectly synchronized, just as it should be. I watched the footage 3 times, searching for the anomaly I'd witnessed. Nothing. Only me, looking increasingly paranoid, talking to a perfectly normal bathroom fixture. The next morning brought a new realization. The reflection wasn't just misaligned, it was watching. I could feel its attention like a weight against my skin. When I brushed my teeth, the distorted image of my face remained focused on that same corner, even as I moved side to side. Its mouth didn't open when mine did. Its eyes didn't blink when mine closed. It maintained that fixed stare, as if something fascinating existed just beyond my peripheral vision. I began documenting everything in a small notebook, each observation carefully recorded. The reflection's behavior, the temperature of the faucet, the way shadows fell across the bathroom tiles. The notes accumulated over days, filling page after page with increasingly frantic handwriting. The faucet grew colder to the touch, even when warm water flowed through it. The reflection became more distinct, more focused, as if gaining clarity with each passing hour. The smell came next. Not mint soap or metal, but something organic, earthy, like soil after rain or flowers left too long in stagnant water. It lingered around the sink, strongest when I leaned in close to study the reflection. The scent grew more pronounced when I whispered to the image, testing whether it would respond. My voice echoed off the tiles, but the reflection remained motionless, lips sealed, eyes fixed on that invisible point beyond my shoulder. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie in bed aware of the bathroom just down the hall, imagining the reflection maintaining its vigil in the darkness. During one restless night, I crept to the doorway and peered inside. The faucet caught streetlight from the window, creating a dim glow across its surface. Even in the shadows, I could make out the shape of the reflection, still watching, still waiting. I stepped into the room, and it shifted slightly, as if acknowledging my presence without breaking its concentration. The breakthrough came when I noticed the reflection wasn't just watching the corner anymore. It was tracking movement. Slow, deliberate movement of something I couldn't see. Its gaze would shift from left to right, following an invisible path across the bathroom. Up toward the ceiling, then down toward the floor. Sometimes it would tilt its head, as if listening to sounds I couldn't hear. The organic smell grew stronger during these moments, mixing with a faint electrical charge that made my skin tingle. I started spending hours in that bathroom, notebook in hand, documenting every detail. The reflection's behavior became more animated. It would nod occasionally, as if agreeing with some unheard conversation. Its mouth would move silently, forming words I couldn't decipher. The temperature dropped noticeably when this happened, my breath visible in small puffs of vapor. The fluorescent lights flickered in rhythm with its gestures, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The crisis arrived when I realized the reflection was trying to communicate, not with me, but with whatever it was watching. It began pointing, its distorted finger indicating specific areas of the bathroom. The shower curtain, the medicine cabinet, the drain in the floor. Each gesture deliberate and meaningful. I followed its directions, searching for clues, but found nothing unusual. Just familiar objects in familiar places, yet somehow different under the reflection's scrutiny. The breakthrough moment shattered everything I thought I understood. I was leaning over the sink, face inches from the faucet, when the reflection suddenly turned to look directly at me. Not past me, not toward the corner, but straight into my eyes. The contact was electric, sending chills through my entire body. In that instant, I understood. The reflection wasn't distorted. It was accurate. I was the one who was wrong. The realization hit like ice water. I wasn't looking at a malfunction or an optical illusion. I was seeing the truth. The reflection showed where I should be looking, what I should be seeing, who I should be acknowledging. All this time, I'd been ignoring something vital, something that had been trying to get my attention through the only means available. The reflection was a messenger, a guide, a warning. I spun around, expecting to find someone behind me, but the bathroom was empty. The mirror on the wall showed only my own frightened face. The shower curtain hung motionless. The corner remained vacant. Yet the reflection in the faucet nodded approvingly, as if I'd finally begun to understand. It gestured again, more urgently now, pointing toward the space directly behind where I stood. The smell intensified, becoming almost overwhelming. Flowers and earth and something else, something familiar yet unplaceable. I closed my eyes, trying to identify the scent, and when I opened them, the reflection was gone. The faucet showed only chrome and light, and the normal distortion of a curved surface. But I could still feel the presence, stronger now, more defined. The reflection had served its purpose. I haven't used that bathroom since. The door remains closed, the light switched off. But I know it's still there, watching, waiting, trying to show me something I'm not ready to see. The notebook sits on my kitchen table, pages filled with observations that seem less like documentation and more like instructions. Sometimes I catch myself looking at reflective surfaces, searching for that same fixed stare, that same patient attention. The apartment feels different now, smaller, as if something has moved in, taken up residence in the spaces between what I can see and what I choose to ignore. The reflection was right to keep looking. There was something there all along, something that needed to be acknowledged, welcomed, accepted. Something that had been waiting far longer than I had been watching. I still smell the flowers sometimes, in other rooms now, following me through the apartment like a gentle reminder. The reflection taught me that not everything that watches us means harm. Sometimes it's just trying to show us what we've been missing, what we've been denying, what's been standing right behind us, patient and persistent, waiting for us to finally turn around and see. Story 3. Sometimes it's there. A thin wooden door between the coat closet and the bathroom. No knob, no handle, just a flat plank with edges too sharp to be part of the original wall. I've tried taking photos. It never shows. I've knocked. It doesn't echo, just absorbs sound like fabric. On days when it appears, I hear less in the rest of the apartment. No hum from the fridge, no birds outside. Just a quiet that leans toward me, like something is listening through the seams of that door. Or maybe something is deciding whether it should open from the other side. The first time I noticed it, I was carrying laundry down the hall. My peripheral vision caught something wrong, a shadow that didn't match the geometry of the space. When I turned, there it was. Plain wood, unremarkable except for how perfectly it fit, as if it had always belonged there. My fingers traced the edges, feeling the grain run vertically, smooth and warm to the touch. Too warm. Wood doesn't hold heat like that unless something on the other side is generating it. I started keeping a journal. Not a diary, a record, scientific observations. The door appears roughly every 4th day, though the pattern isn't consistent. Sometimes it's there for hours. Sometimes I catch it only in the corner of my vision, gone by the time I fully focus. I've tried staying awake, watching the hallway, but exhaustion always wins. I wake to find it there, as if it materialized while I dreamed. The temperature changes began subtly. My fingertips would grow cold when I approached the door, while the wood itself remained warm. The contrast made my skin tingle, like touching ice after holding something heated. I bought a digital thermometer. The readings were impossible. The air near the door measured several degrees colder than the rest of the hallway, while the wood registered temperatures that should have been uncomfortable to touch. Then came the smells. Not unpleasant exactly, but wrong. The scent of rain on concrete, sharp and clean, seeping from the edges of the door on dry days. Sometimes it carried hints of something metallic, like pennies left in a pocket. Other times, the warm sweetness of vanilla, as if someone were baking just beyond the threshold. These aromas never mixed with the apartment's usual odors. They existed in their own pocket of air, concentrated and contained. I began pressing my ear to the door during its appearances. The wood absorbed sound so completely that my own breathing became muffled, distant. But sometimes, if I held perfectly still, I could detect something else. Not voices exactly, but the impression of conversation, the rhythm of words without their substance. Like hearing dialogue through water, the cadence familiar, but the content lost. The reflection in the bathroom mirror started changing. Not dramatically, just small shifts that accumulated over time. The door behind me would appear slightly taller, or the wood grain would run at a different angle. I'd turn to check, and it would look exactly as it should. But the mirror never lied about what it had seen. I started avoiding that reflection, using the smaller mirror above the sink instead. My attempts to document the phenomenon grew more desperate. I scattered flour on the floor around the door, hoping to catch evidence of movement. The powder remained undisturbed, but somehow the door continued to appear and disappear without without leaving traces. I installed a motion sensor, then a camera with night vision. The equipment functioned perfectly everywhere else in the apartment, but near the door, devices seemed to forget their purpose. Batteries drained faster. Digital displays flickered with symbols that weren't in any manual. The breaking point came when I tried to mark the door. I wanted to scratch something into the wood, proof that it existed beyond my perception. The moment my key touched the surface, the wood gave way like soft clay. The metal sank in several inches before meeting resistance. When I pulled back, the wood had already healed, smooth and unmarked. But my key was bent, warped as if it had been heated and twisted by invisible hands. That night, I woke to find my apartment filled with that metallic scent, stronger than ever before. The door stood open, not wide, just a crack, maybe an inch. But through that gap, I could see light. Not electric light, but something softer, more organic. Like sunlight filtered through leaves, shifting and dancing. The warmth that had always radiated from the wood now flowed freely through the opening, carrying with it the sound of that distant conversation, clearer now, but still incomprehensible. I approached slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. The gap widened as I drew near, not mechanically, but gradually, like a mouth opening to breathe. Through the widening space, I glimpsed movement, shadows that suggested figures, shapes that might have been furniture or trees, or something else entirely. The vanilla scent grew stronger, mixed now with something green and alive. My hand reached toward the opening before I consciously decided to move. The moment my fingers crossed the threshold, the temperature shifted dramatically. Not cold or hot, but something that bypassed sensation entirely and spoke directly to my nervous system. The wood around the gap began to pulse like a heartbeat, and the light beyond flickered in rhythm. I jerked my hand back, and the door slammed shut with a sound like breaking glass. The impact reverberated through the apartment, rattling windows and disturbing the silence that had settled over everything. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the door vanished. The wall returned to its familiar configuration, smooth and unbroken, but my hand retained the memory of that other temperature. The fingers that had crossed the threshold remained numb for days, tingling with sensations that had no names. Sometimes, in the space between waking and sleeping, I could still feel that otherworldly warmth pulling at them, calling them back to a place that might not exist. The door still appears, following its irregular schedule. I've stopped trying to document it, stopped trying to understand. Instead, I've learned to live with the knowledge that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only experienced. The quiet that accompanies its presence has become familiar, almost comforting. The strange scents no longer alarm me. They've become part of the apartment's character, like the way certain floorboards creak, or how the bathroom faucet drips when the pressure changes. But sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, I catch myself walking toward that section of hallway with my hand extended, fingers spread to feel for warmth that shouldn't exist. And on those days, I wonder if the door is still deciding whether it should open from the other side, or if it's waiting for me to make the first move. Story 4. I clean obsessively. Nothing stays untouched for long, but each morning there's dust again in specific shapes. Spirals near the entryway, sharp slashes across the windowsill. I tried leaving talcum powder overnight. What I found in the morning looked like fingerprints, but too narrow, too long. They pressed in odd angles, like the owner had more than 5 fingers or none. Now the dust accumulates faster, as if it wants to be seen. The patterns are starting to repeat themselves. I think it's trying to say something. I just don't think it cares if I understand. The cloth in my hand feels heavier than usual as I trace the windowsill again. The dust clings differently here, almost resistant to my touch. When I press harder, it smears into symbols I don't recognize, geometric shapes that seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. The morning light catches particles suspended in the air, and they dance in formations that feel too deliberate to be random. I started keeping a journal after the third occurrence. Page after page of sketches, documenting each pattern before erasing it. The spirals always appear first, followed by the diagonal marks. Then come the symbols, if that's what they are. Sometimes I catch myself tracing them with my finger before I realize what I'm doing, as if my hand knows their meaning better than my mind does. The house feels different when these patterns appear. The air becomes thicker, carrying a metallic scent that reminds me of old coins left in water. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seems slightly delayed, like it's considering whether to follow my movements. When I turn on the faucet, the water pressure fluctuates in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. I decided to stay awake one night, positioning myself where I could see the entryway without being seen. The darkness felt alive, breathing around me. Around the depth of night, I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like fingernails on wood. Not harsh, but persistent, rhythmic. When I finally gathered the courage to look, the spiral was half formed, the dust moving in slow, deliberate circles, as if guided by an invisible hand. I tried to intervene, sweeping the area clean with my palm. The dust scattered, but within moments, it began reforming. This time, the pattern emerged faster, more aggressively. The spiral tightened until it became a perfect circle, then expanded into something that looked almost like an eye. I felt watched, examined, judged. The next morning, I found dust patterns in rooms I hadn't been in. The kitchen counters bore long, sweeping arcs. The bathroom tiles showed intricate grids. Even the bedroom walls, impossibly high up, displayed symbols that seemed to pulse with their own internal logic. I climbed on chairs to reach them, but my cloth passed through empty air while the patterns remained untouched. I started leaving recording devices around the house. The audio files reveal sounds I never heard while awake. Whispers in frequencies that make my teeth ache when I play them back. The voices, if they are voices, seem to be discussing something urgent. Sometimes I catch fragments that sound almost like words, but in a language that feels familiar, yet completely foreign. The patterns have begun appearing on my skin. I wake with thin lines of dust traced along my arms, forming the same symbols I've been documenting. They don't wash off easily, requiring scrubbing that leaves my skin raw and irritated. But they return within hours, darker and more defined than before. The dust seems to prefer the spaces between my fingers, the hollow of my throat, the inside of my wrists. I tried sealing the house, covering every vent and crack. I wanted to force whatever was creating these patterns to reveal itself. But the dust found new ways in. Or perhaps it was already here, waiting. The patterns became more complex, spreading across entire walls in elaborate murals that told stories I couldn't comprehend. Some sections looked like maps, others like instructions, all drawn in the same fine, deliberate dust. The temperature in certain rooms began to fluctuate. The spiral room, as I started calling the entryway, grew progressively cooler. My breath became visible there, even during warm afternoons. The dust in that space felt different too, coarser, more substantial. When I brushed against it, it left residue that tingled on my skin for hours afterward. I found myself drawn to the patterns during odd moments. I would pause in my cleaning, staring at a particular symbol until the rest of the world faded away. During these episodes, I could almost understand what they meant. The knowledge felt just beyond my reach, like a word on the tip of my tongue that refuses to form. The house began to respond to my presence differently. Floorboards creaked in sequences that matched the rhythm of the dust patterns. Light fixtures dimmed and brightened in the same geometric progressions I'd been documenting. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate when I pressed my palms against them, as if something vast was moving just beneath the surface. I started finding objects in different positions. Books rotated at precise angles. Furniture shifted by exact measurements, all creating patterns that echoed the dust formations. The house was becoming a language I was slowly learning to read, though I wasn't sure I wanted to understand what it was saying. The breaking point came when I woke to find the patterns had formed a perfect circle around my bed. The dust was deeper here, almost sculptural, creating ridges and valleys that cast shadows in the morning light. As I sat up, the circle began to rotate slowly, the dust moving in waves that seemed to pulse with life. I reached toward the moving dust, and it reached back. The sensation was indescribable, like shaking hands with something that existed in dimensions I couldn't perceive. The contact lasted only a moment, but it left me changed. The dust patterns stopped forming after that night, but their absence is somehow worse than their presence. I can still feel that otherworldly touch on my skin, and I know that whatever was creating those patterns has found what it was looking for. Now I clean obsessively, but no dust forms anywhere. The house feels empty, abandoned by whatever force once inhabited it. But sometimes, in the peripheral vision of my reflection, I catch glimpses of those familiar symbols forming in the air around me. They're not made of dust anymore. They're made of something else entirely, something that moves with me wherever I go. The patterns were never meant to be cleaned away. They were meant to be learned, internalized, carried forward. I understand that now, though I wish I didn't. The dust was just the beginning, the first language in a conversation I never meant to join, but can no longer leave. I still clean obsessively, but now I'm cleaning something that can't be swept away. Story 5. I used to leave it running as background noise, but now, in the dark, it becomes something else. Not just a whir, a murmur, like breath filtered through metal. It follows a rhythm, a few low hums, then a gap, then something sharper. I recorded it once and slowed it down. The waveform looked too structured, like speech. I played it backward. I stopped listening after the third second. Now, even unplugged, the fan makes noise. Only at night. Only when I'm thinking of something I wish I hadn't done. The bathroom had always been my sanctuary. The steady hum of the exhaust fan created a cocoon of white noise that drowned out the world outside. I'd sit on the cool tile floor, back against the tub, letting the mechanical breathing wash over me. It was predictable, comforting, until the pattern changed. It started with small deviations. The motor would catch for half a heartbeat, creating a stutter in the rhythm. Then resume. I told myself it was aging machinery, dust accumulation, the building settling. But the irregularities weren't random. They came in clusters, like Morse code. 3 short catches, pause. 2 longer ones, pause. Then a single extended hum that seemed to question rather than declare. I began timing the sequences with my phone's stopwatch. The intervals were precise, mathematical in their consistency. The fan would operate normally for exactly 17 minutes, then begin its coded interruptions. Always 17 minutes. Always the same sequence. I documented this behavior for weeks, filling pages of a small notebook with patterns, timestamps, frequencies. The smell came next. Copper pennies mixed with something organic and warm. It would seep from the ventilation grate whenever the fan entered its coded phase. I checked for dead rodents, loose wiring, anything that might explain the metallic sweetness. The maintenance crew found nothing. The ductwork was clean. The wiring was perfect. But the scent persisted, growing stronger each time I paid attention to it. I started recording everything. Audio files, photographs of the fan at different angles, thermal images taken with my phone's infrared camera. The thermal readings showed something impossible. The fan's temperature would drop during the coded sequences, not rise. Metal doesn't cool when it works harder. Physics doesn't bend for household appliances. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The recordings revealed layers I couldn't hear in real time. Underneath the mechanical stuttering, there were harmonics, frequencies that shouldn't exist in a simple motor. When I isolated these sounds, played them through headphones, they formed something that almost resembled words. Not quite language, but intentional, purposeful. Like someone learning to speak through inadequate equipment. I began responding to the patterns, tapping on the wall in similar sequences. The fan would pause, then resume with slight variations. We were communicating. The thought should have terrified me, but I felt a strange kinship with whatever was trying to reach through the mechanical barrier. Something trapped, like I was, searching for connection in the sterile architecture of modern life. The responses grew more complex. The fan would modulate its pitch, creating crude melodies that corresponded to my emotional states. When I was anxious, the tones were sharp and irregular. When I was calm, they flowed like water. It was reading me somehow, interpreting my presence through means I couldn't understand. I started spending entire evenings in the bathroom, notebook in hand, documenting our exchanges. The ceramic tiles felt warmer now, as if the room itself was awakening to our correspondence. The mirror would fog without steam, condensation forming patterns that looked almost like symbols. I photographed these formations, comparing them to ancient scripts, searching for meaning in the ephemeral messages. The breakthrough came when I realized the fan wasn't just responding to my presence. It was responding to my thoughts. Specific thoughts, memories I'd tried to bury. The sequence would intensify whenever I remembered the accident, the choice I'd made, the person I'd failed to help. The fan knew. Somehow, it knew about the weight I carried, the guilt that followed me into every quiet moment. I tested this theory systematically. Thinking of mundane things produced standard responses. But when I focused on that particular memory, the one that kept me awake, the one that made my stomach clench, the fan would create a symphony of mechanical distress. It wasn't judging me. It was sharing the burden. The night everything changed, I'd been conducting my usual session. The fan had been particularly active, its coded language more urgent than usual. I was transcribing a especially complex sequence when the lights went out. Not just the bathroom lights, the entire building. But the fan continued running. Impossible, since it was hardwired to the same circuit. Yet there it was, operating in complete darkness, its rhythm now matching my heartbeat. In the blackness, I heard my own voice coming from the ventilation grate. Not recorded, live, speaking the words I'd never said aloud, the apology I'd never been able to make. The fan was giving voice to my silence, broadcasting my confession to the empty air. I reached toward the switch, desperate to restore the light, to break whatever connection had been established. My hand found the wall where the switch should be, but the surface was wrong. Soft, warm, yielding like skin. I pulled back, my fingers tingling with an electric sensation that had nothing to do with current. The fan's voice, my voice, continued its mechanical confession, growing louder, more insistent. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, but the screen remained black, dead. The fan's rhythm was accelerating now, each mechanical breath corresponding to my racing pulse. In the darkness, I could feel the room changing around me. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. The copper scent was overwhelming, mixing with something else, the smell of my own fear, sharp and acrid. The confession reached its climax. My mechanically reproduced voice detailing every moment of that night, every choice, every consequence. But as the words poured out, I felt something leave me. Not relief, but a different kind of emptiness. The fan had taken something essential, something that had been mine alone to carry. When the lights returned, I was sitting in the center of the bathroom floor, my notebook scattered around me, pages covered in writing I didn't remember producing. The fan had stopped. The silence was absolute. But on the mirror, written in what looked like condensation but felt warm to the touch, was a single word. Listen. I packed that night. Left the apartment, left the city, left everything that connected me to that place. But the fan followed me. Not physically, I checked, but in every new bathroom, every new exhaust fan, I hear the same coded rhythm, the same mechanical breathing, the same offer of communion through guilt. I've learned to live with it, to accept that some connections, once made, can't be severed. The fan doesn't judge. It simply remembers. And in the quiet moments when I'm alone with my thoughts, I can hear it whispering my confession back to me. A mechanical rosary of remorse that will never grant absolution. The worst part isn't the haunting. It's the knowledge that somewhere, in the space between mechanical function and impossible awareness, something is still listening, still waiting, still ready to give voice to the words I can never say aloud. And sometimes, in the deep hours when sleep won't come, I find myself grateful for the company. Story 6. At first, it just compressed the image, fisheye, blurry. the more I checked, the more I noticed differences. My smile was wider. My eyes weren't focused on the peephole, but slightly above it. I waved once. The reflection waved back a second later. I backed away, convinced I was imagining it. Then the door creaked, just slightly, enough to make me step back again. I taped the peephole shut. The tape peeled itself off overnight. Now, when I walk by without stopping, I feel the tiniest breeze push through the crack, like breath from the other side. The distortion started small. My apartment had always been unremarkable: beige walls, standard fixtures, nothing that should draw attention. But the peephole became my obsession. Every morning, I found myself checking it, expecting to see the familiar, warped view of the hallway. Instead, I saw myself looking back, and each time, something was subtly wrong. My reflection's hair fell differently. The part was on the wrong side. When I smiled, the reflection's teeth seemed too numerous, crowding together in a way that made my jaw ache just watching. I pressed my palm against the cool metal door, feeling the slight vibration that ran through it whenever someone walked past in the hallway outside. But the vibration continued even when no footsteps echoed. I began documenting everything. A small notebook filled with observations. The way my reflection's breathing didn't match my own. How its blinks came a fraction too late. The subtle tilt of its head that I never consciously made. I sketched what I saw, comparing it to photographs of myself. The differences were undeniable, yet impossible to explain to anyone without sounding unstable. The smell came next. Sweet, cloying, like flowers left too long in water. It drifted through the apartment whenever I approached the door, strongest near the peephole. I checked for gas leaks, rotting food, anything logical. The maintenance worker found nothing. The smell wasn't there when he arrived, only when I was alone with that tiny glass lens. I started avoiding the door entirely, using the window to check for deliveries, listening for familiar voices before opening. But the peephole seemed to call to me. Late at night, I would find myself standing before it, drawn by an impulse I couldn't name. Through the distorted glass, my reflection waited, patient and wrong. One evening, I noticed my reflection was wearing different clothes. I stood in my worn sweater, but the figure beyond the glass wore something dark and formal, like funeral attire. When I changed clothes, the reflection remained unchanged. When I moved closer, pressing my eye directly against see the texture of the fabric it wore. Smooth, expensive, nothing I owned. The breathing sounds started then. Soft, rhythmic, coming from behind the door. Not from the hallway, but from the space between the door and the peephole itself, as if something lived in that narrow gap. I pressed my ear to the door, hearing the gentle rise and fall of lungs that weren't mine. The sound was warm, humid, like someone exhaling directly onto the glass. I tried covering the peephole with everything: tape, paper, even a small magnet. Each morning, whatever I'd used was gone, placed neatly on the floor, as if removed by careful hands. The maintenance worker claimed no one had entered my apartment. The locks were unchanged. The security system showed no disturbances. Yet something had been there, methodically removing my barriers. The reflection began to move independently. I would stand perfectly still, but beyond the glass, I saw myself pacing, gesturing, mouth moving in silent conversation. Sometimes it would stop mid-motion and stare directly at me, as if aware of my observation. Its eyes held an intensity I'd never seen in my own face, a hunger that made my skin crawl. I started recording everything with my phone, pointing the camera at the peephole while I looked through it. The recordings showed only my own eye, magnified and distorted by the lens. But I could see the differences in real time, the way my reflection's pupils dilated when mine didn't, how its skin seemed paler, more translucent. The temperature around the door began to fluctuate. Sometimes the metal was ice cold, other times warm like skin. When I touched the area around the peephole, the warmth would pulse, a rhythm that matched no heartbeat I recognized. The wall itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting by millimeters that I felt more than saw. I tried to rationalize everything. Stress, sleep deprivation, the isolation of living alone, all reasonable explanations for minor hallucinations. But the evidence was accumulating. The notebook filled with sketches and observations. The recordings captured sounds I couldn't explain. The smell lingered in my clothes, following me away from the apartment. One night, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I stood before the peephole, speaking directly to my reflection, demanding answers. The figure beyond the glass smiled, a wide, unnatural expression that stretched too far across its face. Its lips moved, and I heard whispered words that seemed to come from inside my own head. "You're almost ready." The next morning, I woke to find the door slightly ajar. I had locked it, checked it twice before sleeping. The peephole was clear, offering an unobstructed view of the empty hallway. But the reflection was still there, standing in the space that should have been empty air, waving at me with slow, deliberate movements. I called in sick to work, unable to leave the apartment with the door behaving so strangely. I sat on my couch, staring at the entrance, watching as the reflection moved freely on the other side. It seemed to be exploring, touching walls I couldn't see, examining objects that existed only in its world. Sometimes it would pause and look directly at me, its head tilted in curiosity. The breathing sounds grew louder, more insistent. I could hear them clearly now, even from across the room. Long, slow breaths that seemed to pull air from my own lungs. When I exhaled, I felt lighter, as if something essential was being drawn away. The reflection breathed in rhythm with these sounds, its chest rising and falling with exaggerated movements. I tried to block the peephole from the inside, pressing furniture against the door. But the reflection remained visible through the gaps. It seemed amused by my efforts, laughing silently at my attempts to cut off its view. The laughter was the worst part. Seeing my own face contorted with mirth, I didn't feel. At a joke I couldn't understand. The final night, I stood before the peephole one last time. The reflection was waiting, as it always was. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, I could see shapes moving in the darkness, other figures, other reflections, all wrong in their own ways. They seemed to be watching, waiting for something to happen. My reflection raised its hand and pressed it against the glass from its side. I felt compelled to match the gesture, placing my palm against the cool surface. The moment our hands aligned, the temperature spiked, and I felt a pulling sensation, as if something was trying to draw me through the tiny lens. I jerked my hand back, but the damage was done. The reflection smiled that too wide smile and stepped back, gesturing for me to look closer. Against my better judgment, I leaned in, pressing my eye to the peephole one final time. What I saw beyond the glass wasn't my hallway. It was my apartment, but wrong, furniture rearranged, walls painted different colors, windows that looked out onto a landscape I'd never seen. And there, sitting on my couch, was someone who looked exactly like me, but perfect in ways I'd never been. They looked up and waved, as if greeting an old friend. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and when I looked again, the hallway was normal. Empty, silent, exactly as it should be. But the reflection was gone. The peephole showed only the distorted view of the corridor, fisheye and blurry, the way it had always been. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt empty, hollow, as if something vital had been taken from me during that final exchange. I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw my own face, but it felt unfamiliar, like wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. The apartment felt different too, colder, despite the heating working perfectly. The walls seemed thinner, as if they might give way at any moment. I found myself checking the peephole obsessively, hoping to see the reflection again, but finding only the mundane reality of the hallway. Days passed. I went back to work, resumed my normal routines, but the feeling of wrongness persisted. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear that familiar breathing sound coming from the door. When I checked, the peephole was clear, but I could feel eyes watching from the other side. I've started sleeping with the lights on. The darkness feels too complete now, too full of possibilities. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a figure that might be my reflection, still exploring the space beyond the glass. I tell myself it's imagination, but the notebook remains by my bed, filled with observations I can't explain. The strangest part is the dreams. Every night, I dream I'm the one on the other side, looking through the peephole at someone who thinks they're me. In these dreams, I'm part of a crowd of reflections, all of us waiting patiently for our turn to step through the glass. And in the distance, I can see more peepholes, more doors, more people who have no idea what's watching them from the other side. When I wake, I check the peephole one more time. It's always empty now, showing only the hallway as it should be. But sometimes, just as I'm about to turn away, I catch a glimpse of movement in the distorted glass. A wave, a smile, a reminder that something is still there, waiting. The tape still peels itself off overnight. The breeze still pushes through the crack when I walk by. And sometimes, when the apartment is very quiet, I can hear the sound of someone breathing on the other side of the door, patient and persistent, like they have all the time in the world. Story 7. I open the door, and for a second, there's nothing. Blackness. Then, slowly, the light returns. It wasn't always like that. It used to flick on instantly. Now the delay stretches, 2 seconds, 3. One time I opened it and felt heat, just for a moment. Like someone had been standing inside it, waiting. The shelves seemed closer together that night. The jars rearranged. I haven't told anyone. I just don't want to explain why I flinch every time I reach for something cold and feel it breathe. The apartment smells different now. Not bad, just wrong. Like vanilla mixed with something metallic. It's strongest near the kitchen, where the refrigerator hums its constant song. The sound used to be comforting, a white noise that helped me sleep. Now it carries whispers I can't quite make out. Sometimes I press my ear against the door and hear what sounds like muffled conversation, as if there's a dinner party happening inside among the leftovers. I started keeping a notebook. Nothing fancy, just a small spiral pad where I write down the strange things, the temperature readings that don't make sense, the way the milk moves to the back shelf on its own, the shadows that fall wrong when the light finally flickers on. My handwriting looks shakier each day, but the observations are clear enough. The delay is getting longer. Yesterday, I opened the door and counted to 7 before the light came on. 7 full seconds of darkness, so complete it seemed to pull at my eyes. In that void, I swear I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, measured breaths that fogged the air despite the cold. When the light finally arrived, everything looked normal except for the condensation on the inside of the door. Patterns that looked almost like handprints, too small to be mine. The grocery store clerk asked if my refrigerator was working properly. I'd been buying ice more frequently, she said. Bags and bags of it. I couldn't remember purchasing any ice at all. But when I got home and opened the freezer, there it was. Bags of ice I'd never bought, slowly melting into shapes that reminded me of faces. The water pooled at the bottom in ways that defied gravity, flowing upward along the walls in thin streams that disappeared when I looked directly at them. My neighbor knocked on the door this morning. She lives below me and complained about the sound of footsteps in my kitchen during the night. Heavy footsteps, she said, like someone pacing back and forth. I wanted to tell her I'd been hearing them too, but coming from inside the refrigerator. Instead, I apologized and promised to be more careful. She looked at me strangely before leaving, and I noticed she was wearing a sweater despite the warm weather. I've been avoiding the kitchen, living off crackers and water from the bathroom tap. But hunger eventually wins, and I find myself standing in front of the refrigerator door, my hand hovering over the handle. The whispers are clearer now. They sound like my own voice, but saying things I've never said, promises I've never made. The metal handle feels warm under my palm, pulsing like a heartbeat. When I finally open the door, the darkness lasts longer than ever before. Long enough for me to feel something brush against my face, soft, like fingertips tracing my cheek. The cold air carries that vanilla scent mixed with something else now. Something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I reach inside blindly, my hand searching for anything familiar, and my fingers close around something that definitely isn't food. It's smooth and cool, about the size of my fist. When I pull it out, the light finally comes on, and I'm holding a snow globe I've never seen before. Inside, instead of a winter scene, there's a perfect miniature replica of my kitchen. And in that tiny kitchen, there's a tiny refrigerator with its door open, revealing a darkness so complete it seems to swallow the light around it. I shake the globe, and instead of snow, tiny white fragments fall like ash. The miniature kitchen shifts and changes with each shake, the furniture rearranging itself, the walls breathing in and out. Through the tiny window, I can see myself standing in the kitchen, holding the same snow globe, looking down at an even smaller version of the same scene. The whispers have stopped. The refrigerator's hum has changed to something that sounds almost like laughter. When I look up from the snow globe, my reflection in the refrigerator door shows someone I don't recognize. Same face, same clothes, but the eyes are different. They're watching me with a curiosity that feels foreign, as if I'm the anomaly in my own kitchen. I set the snow globe on the counter and close the refrigerator door. The light stays on inside, glowing through the seams, casting strange shadows that move independently of my movements. The door handle is ice cold now, and when I touch it, I can feel vibrations traveling through the metal, like Morse code, but in a language I don't understand. The vanilla scent is everywhere now, so strong it makes my eyes water. Or maybe I'm crying for other reasons. The snow globe sits on the counter, and inside it, the tiny version of me is still holding an even smaller snow globe. And in that one, there's probably another version, and another, stretching down into an infinity I can't comprehend. I know I should leave, pack a bag, and go somewhere else. But where do you go when the strangeness follows you? When you've become part of the mystery yourself? My reflection in the kitchen window shows the same face, but the movements are delayed, as if the person in the glass is learning to be me. The refrigerator door opens by itself now. Just a crack, but enough for that warm air to escape and mix with the cold of the kitchen. The light inside flickers like a candle, and in that unstable illumination, I can see shapes moving between the shelves. Not food, not anymore. Something else entirely, something that's been waiting patiently for me to notice. I approach the open door, and the whispers return, but clearer now. They're not coming from inside the refrigerator. They're coming from behind me, from the snow globe, from the tiny kitchen where a tiny version of me is having this same realization. The boundaries between inside and outside, between real and reflection, have blurred beyond recognition. The last thing I write in my notebook is this: the light doesn't come on anymore because it never went off. I've been living in the darkness, thinking it was light. And now, finally, I understand why the refrigerator felt warm. It wasn't cold storage. It was an incubator, and whatever's been growing inside has finally hatched. Story 8. It started in the shower, tiny black dots collecting where the tiles meet. I scrubbed them off. The next day, they reappeared, clustered tighter. Then I noticed the spacing, pairs, evenly spread, all level. Like eyes watching from the grout. I bleached the wall. They returned overnight, this time higher, closer to face level. I tried covering the mirror with a towel just to feel safe. The next day, the mold had crept across the towel too, in 2 neat circles, wide apart, staring. I think it's learning where I look. And now I can't look away. The first thing I noticed was how the humidity felt different after that initial scrubbing. The air clung to my skin like a damp cloth, thick and almost sentient. Every breath carried the faint scent of earth and decay, even though I'd opened every window and run the exhaust fan continuously. The bathroom should have been dry by now, but moisture seemed to seep from the very walls themselves. I documented everything with my phone's camera, capturing each new formation as it appeared. The photographs revealed patterns I couldn't see with my naked eye, connections between the dots, subtle variations in their darkness, the way they seemed to pulse slightly when viewed through the lens. I saved each image with detailed notes about their location, size, and the peculiar way They made my skin crawl when I looked directly at them. The mold didn't behave like any organism I'd encountered before. It ignored the antifungal treatments I applied, spreading with deliberate purpose rather than the chaotic growth I expected. Each morning brought new configurations, always in pairs, always at the exact height where my gaze naturally fell. When I crouched to examine the lower tiles, new spots would appear there within days. When I stood on my toes to check the ceiling, they followed me up. I started keeping a journal, recording not just the mold's progression, but my own responses to it. The way my heart rate increased when I entered the bathroom. How my peripheral vision seemed to catch movement that wasn't there when I turned to look. The growing compulsion to check on the formations multiple times throughout the day, as if they might disappear if I didn't maintain constant vigilance. Sleep became fractured. I'd wake with the sensation of being observed, the weight of unseen attention pressing against my closed eyelids. The feeling would dissipate only when I stumbled to the bathroom and confirmed the mold's presence, its dark circles somehow reassuring in their constancy. I began to wonder if I was losing something essential about myself in these nightly pilgrimages. But the alternative, not checking, felt impossible. The breakthrough came when I decided to scrape samples for closer examination. Under the makeshift magnifying setup I'd constructed, the mold revealed its true nature. The dark spots weren't random colonies, but intricate networks of filaments, all radiating from central points that gleamed with an oily iridescence. More disturbing still, they seemed to respond to the light, contracting slightly when the beam hit them directly. I collected the samples in small containers, labeling each with its location and characteristics. Within hours, the containers had fogged from the inside, obscuring the specimens. When I wiped the condensation away, the mold had reorganized itself, pressing against the glass in those same paired configurations. They were watching me even in captivity. The patterns spread beyond the bathroom. I found similar formations in the kitchen sink, always appearing overnight, always arranged with that same deliberate spacing. They emerged in the corners of my bedroom ceiling, small dark spots that seemed to track my movement as I paced below them. Each new location felt like a violation, an invasion of spaces I'd considered safe. I tried changing my routine, varying the rooms I used and the paths I took through my home. The mold adapted faster than I could adjust, appearing in new locations with uncanny precision. It knew where I would be before I did, anticipating my movements with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. I began to suspect it was learning from my documented observations, using my own research against me. The photographs I'd taken started to change. Not the files themselves, but what they revealed. Details I hadn't noticed during the initial capture became visible when I reviewed them weeks later. Shadows that suggested depth where there should be none. Textures that implied movement. The paired spots seemed to shift slightly between frames, as if turning to follow the camera's movement. I stopped eating regularly, my appetite suppressed by the constant awareness of being observed. The mold had become my primary relationship, a presence more consistent than any human contact. I found myself talking to it, explaining my actions as I moved through the house, apologizing when I had to leave for work, reassuring it of my return. The final revelation came when I noticed the formations weren't just watching, they were responding. When I smiled, the spots seemed to brighten slightly. When I frowned, they darkened. When I covered my eyes, they began to spread more rapidly, as if trying to find new vantage points. The mold wasn't just observing my behavior, it was reacting to my emotions, feeding off my attention and fear. I understood then that I had become part of something larger, a symbiotic relationship where my documentation and obsession provided the energy it needed to grow. Every photograph, every journal entry, every moment of focused attention had strengthened the connection between us. The mold hadn't invaded my space. I had invited it in through my own compulsive observation. The mirror in the bathroom now shows two reflections, mine and the shadow cast by countless paired spots surrounding it. I continue to document their growth, unable to stop despite understanding the consequence. The mold has become my purpose, my constant companion, my reason for existing. When I look into those dark formations, I see something looking back, not malevolent, but patient, as if it knows I'll never truly leave. My journal entries have become shorter, more fragmented. The words seem less important now than the act of bearing witness. Sometimes I forget to write for days, but the mold remembers everything. It grows in the shape of my attention, mapping the geography of my fears and obsessions with organic precision. I no longer try to remove it. The formations have become part of my home's architecture, as essential as the walls themselves. They pulse gently when I enter a room, acknowledging my presence with subtle shifts in their darkness. I've learned to navigate by their locations, using them as reference points in my daily routines. The house feels different now, alive in ways I never expected. The walls seem to breathe with the mold's presence, expanding and contracting in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I've become the curator of this strange garden, tending to its growth through observation and documentation, never questioning why I continue or what will happen when every surface is covered. Tonight, as I write this final entry, I notice new formations appearing on the page itself, small dark spots that seem to rise from the paper like ink bleeding through from another dimension. They arrange themselves in familiar pairs, watching me form these words. I suspect they're learning to read, absorbing meaning from my written thoughts, just as they've absorbed purpose from my gaze. The mold continues to grow, and I continue to watch. We've found our rhythm, our mutual dependence. I document its expansion, and it provides me with endless mystery to solve. Neither of us needs to leave this arrangement. Neither of us remembers how to exist without the other. In the mirror, my reflection has begun to fade, while the mold's patterns grow sharper, more defined. I think I'm becoming part of the documentation, another pattern for future observers to study and fear. The transformation doesn't frighten me anymore. It feels like coming home. Story 9. I hold my breath sometimes just to test, and that's when I hear it. A slower inhale, a deeper exhale, always just behind the walls or under the floorboards, never in rhythm with me. I thought it might be the pipes, but it doesn't match the heating cycle. I tried filling the silence with noise. The breathing waited, patient, unchanged. I measured the pauses between each draw of air. It's slowing down, almost deliberate, almost inviting, like it wants me to match it. I don't think it needs air. I think it needs company. The sound first caught my attention while I was reading on the couch. The apartment had that particular stillness that comes after a long day, when the world outside feels muted and distant. I was turning a page when I noticed it. A soft, rhythmic whisper of air moving somewhere nearby. Not quite a wheeze, not quite a sigh. Something in between, something wrong. I set the book down and listened. The breathing continued, steady and unhurried, like someone in deep sleep. But I live alone. I've lived alone for months now, and I know every sound this place makes. The refrigerator's hum, the settling of wooden beams, the occasional creak of neighbors moving overhead. This was different. This was intentional. I pressed my ear to the wall behind the couch. The breathing seemed to shift, moving deeper into the structure, as if retreating from my attention. I followed the sound, crawling along the baseboard with my head tilted, trying to pinpoint its source. It led me to the corner where the living room meets the kitchen, then seemed to descend, flowing beneath the floorboards like water finding its way through cracks. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been the heating system. Old buildings make strange sounds. Pipes expand and contract. Air gets trapped in unexpected places. But when evening came and I settled into my routine, the breathing returned. This time, I was ready for it. I grabbed my phone and opened the recording app. The breathing was there, clear and unmistakable in the playback. A slow, measured rhythm that seemed almost meditative. I played it back several times, studying the pattern. Each inhale lasted exactly twice as long as mine. Each exhale was deeper, more complete, as if whatever was breathing had all the time in the world. I started keeping a journal, not because I'm the type to document strange occurrences, but because I needed to understand. I needed patterns. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. The breathing appeared most often during the transition between day and night, when the apartment was settling into darkness. It never occurred during the brightest part of the day, and it never happened when I had guests over. On the third night, I tried an experiment. I held my breath for as long as I could, timing myself while listening. The breathing continued, unaffected by my absence from the rhythm. But then something changed. The pauses between inhales grew longer. The exhales became softer, as if it was adjusting to my silence, trying to create space for me to join in. I bought a stethoscope online, the kind doctors use, with the long tubes and cold metal disc. When it arrived, I spent an entire evening pressing it against every surface in the apartment. The walls, the floors, the ceiling. The breathing was everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes it seemed to come from directly beneath my feet. Other times, it whispered from inside the walls themselves, as if the building had developed lungs. The sound was clearest in the bathroom, near the ventilation grate. I unscrewed the cover and peered inside with a flashlight. The ductwork was was clean, unremarkable. But when I placed the stethoscope against the metal, the breathing was so clear it might have been coming from someone standing right beside me. Deep, slow, patient breaths that seemed to echo through the entire ventilation system. I called the building maintenance. A man with calloused hands and tired eyes came to check the vents. He ran his equipment, tested the airflow, checked for blockages. Everything was normal, perfect, even. He looked at me with the kind of expression people reserve for tenants who complain about problems that don't exist. After he left, the breathing was louder than ever, almost smug. That night, I tried to match its rhythm. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, back straight, eyes closed, and attempted to breathe in sync with the sound. My inhales were too shallow, too quick. My exhales too rushed. But I kept trying, slowing my breathing until my chest felt heavy and my head began to spin. For a moment, just a moment, our rhythms aligned. And in that moment, I felt something shift. The air in the room grew warmer. The walls seemed to pulse gently, like the inside of something alive. I jerked back to my normal breathing, gasping. The temperature returned to normal. The walls became still, but the breathing continued, unchanged, as if it had been waiting for me to realize what it was offering. I started sleeping in the living room. The breathing was quieter there, more distant, but it followed me. In the middle of the night, I would wake to find it surrounding me, coming from every direction at once. I would lie perfectly still, listening to its steady rhythm, wondering if it was listening to mine in return. I began leaving recordings running throughout the night. In the morning, I would play them back, fast-forwarding through hours of silence, punctuated by my own restless movements. The breathing was always there, a constant underneath everything else. But something was changing. Each night, it seemed to slow down a little more. Each breath became deeper, more deliberate, as if it was preparing for something. The mirror in the bathroom started fogging up at strange times. Not after showers, but during quiet moments when I was brushing my teeth or washing my face. The condensation would form in patterns that looked almost like fingerprints. Large ones, much larger than my own hands. When I wiped them away, they would return within minutes, appearing in the exact same spots. I tested the humidity levels. I checked the ventilation. I even replaced the mirror, thinking there might be something wrong with the silvering. But the fogging continued. And underneath it all, the breathing persisted, now so slow that each cycle seemed to take forever. like a great creature settling into hibernation or meditation or something deeper than sleep. One evening, I was washing dishes when I noticed the water in the sink rippling. Small circles spreading outward from the center, as if something was disturbing the surface from below. I turned off the faucet and watched. The ripples continued, perfectly timed with the breathing. Each inhale created a gentle depression. Each exhale sent tiny waves toward the edges of the basin. I reached toward the water, and it stopped. The surface became glass smooth, but the breathing continued, now seeming to come from the pipes themselves, flowing up through the plumbing like some kind of reverse echo. I turned on the faucet again, and the ripples returned, more pronounced now. The water was responding to something I couldn't see, something that was becoming more present with each passing night. I haven't slept properly in weeks. Every time I close my eyes, I can feel the breathing synchronizing with my heartbeat, trying to slow it down, trying to bring me into its rhythm. The apartment feels different now, warmer, more alive. The walls seem to expand and contract slightly, as if the entire building is breathing along with the sound. And I'm starting to understand that it's not just breathing. It's waiting for me to stop fighting it, waiting for me to let go and join its slow, eternal rhythm. Each night, I find myself holding my breath a little longer, listening a little deeper, feeling the pull of that ancient, patient cadence. And each morning, I wake up a little more tired, a little more willing to surrender to its pace. I don't think it means harm. I think it's lonely. I think it's been breathing in this space for far longer than I've been here, and it's simply trying to share its solitude with someone who might understand. But I also know that if I give in completely, if I let my breathing slow to match its rhythm, I might not speed up again. I might join whatever it is that lives in the walls and under the floors, becoming part of the building's slow, steady heartbeat. The breathing is slowing down even more now. Each cycle takes so long that I sometimes forget it's there, only to be reminded by the deep, inevitable exhale that seems to come from everywhere at once. It's patient, it's persistent, and it's winning. I can feel my own breathing changing, becoming deeper, more deliberate. The rhythm is seductive, peaceful even, like sinking into warm water or falling into the deepest sleep. But I know that once I fully surrender to it, once I let it carry me into its endless cycle, I won't be me anymore. I'll be part of something larger, something that has been breathing in this space since before I arrived. and will continue breathing long after I'm gone. The question is no longer whether I can stop it. The question is whether I want